How do we know when we can trust the experts? How do we know when experts are relaying to us the best information that's at their disposal and are presenting to us the most up to date consensus with respect to their field? And are there situations in which, cases in which experts may be incorrect about what they're saying? Loosely speaking, the subject of expertise is what's going to be the subject of this video. Now, this video, as you can see, is a response to a different video put out by PragerU recently. I think it was a week or so ago, which is a clip I'm taking of a larger conversation that the person featured here, Denis Prager. He does these fireside chats, I think is what they're called. And we're just going to be reviewing the part of the video where he talks about expertise and his distrust of expert opinion. And I think this is important to cover. One, because this is a sentiment that I oftentimes get, especially related to topics that might be considered more conspiratorial in thinking. But two, just because I think culturally speaking, there is a larger and larger distrust of the academic establishment, the perceived academic establishment. Academia in kind of vague forms has come under attack, specifically in more like conservative conspiratorial thinking that education and academics are out to like poison the well, to corrupt the youth, to change your kids into X, Y, or Z. And at the heart of that, I think, is a sort of anti intellectualism and fundamental distrust that is being fostered by people like Prager. So that's the big reason why I want to make this video. But I also want to get into some of the specific claims made by Prager. So yeah, this video is from the PragerU YouTube channel, and this is Denis Prager who is speaking, who is the founder of PragerU. I don't know much about him personally. I've seen quite a bit of his videos because there's a lot of revisionist history on his channel, especially in the kids video, which is very disappointing. But let's talk about what Denis Prager himself has to say.
Over the course of my life, and certainly now post lockdowns and COVID, whenever I see experts say, I assume I will hear or read something stupid. I don't always, I'm saying I assume. It may not be, I fully acknowledge that. But my immediate assumption is it will be foolish, because it usually is.
Yeah, so I'm not even sure where to start with that statement. On a surface level, it kind of reeks of narcissism. I hate to say it, not to sit here and try to diagnose people, but I can't imagine myself, and that's, I just can't imagine taking the mindset and the perception of the world that every single person is wrong except for myself, and that I know I'm right over and against every single expert. Like, I just don't get that mindset. That's not to say that I inherently believe every single person that tells me any story or anything, or that we shouldn't have a a healthy level of skepticism towards the sort of claims that people are making. But this is the opposite end of the spectrum, a fundamental distrust of what every expert says, just as the base level starting point. And because of that, I think what Prager is promoting here is a very dangerous form of anti-intellectualism, in which, as we'll see, ultimately there becomes no basis for expertise. There becomes no standard types of credibility or evidence upon which to build larger proclamation. And that leaves you at a point in which everybody's quote unquote opinion or everybody's thoughts on a particular matter are of equal value, regardless of the sort of educational, technical, or career training that they have received on that topic. In which case, I know better than a surgeon who's been training for 10 years because there's no longer any basis for expertise, or I know better than a public health advisor who's been studying vaccines or the spread of pandemics at an academic level, because there's no basis or no reason for me to fundamentally trust them. I'm going to fundamentally distrust them. But I think a more generous listening to, reading of Prager on this point would be to assume that he's talking about the appeal to authority fallacy, which is a legitimate logical fallacy that we encounter in philosophy. So I'll briefly cover that, assuming that's what he's talking about when he's talking about either experts themselves or other people incorrectly appealing to experts. So let's talk about that for a little bit. So, the appeal to authority fallacy occurs when somebody claims something is true or something is valid simply because a authority figure or a perceived authority figure says that it is true or valid without providing the sufficient level of evidence to back up those claims. Now, there's three general ways that we can spot an appeal to authority fallacy when somebody's making such a fallacy. The first would be to clarify what the expert is actually an expert in and to figure out, is that thing what the expert is talking about. I'm confusing myself by using general language here. So let me give an example. Is the person talking about, let's say, the origins of the universe, an astrophysicist or a cosmologist? Or are they some celebrity that's pontificating on some podcast about where they think matter and time and space came from? One of those people is qualified to speak to that subject. The other has no formal training, no background, and we have no clue where they're getting their information on that topic from. A very popular example of this we see in diet trends when a celebrity endorses a particular diet and talks about the health benefits of that particular diet and how it worked for them. While it may have worked for them, that person is not a nutritionist, does not have a background in health or the human body or medicine or any of those things. So, first and foremost, appeal to authority fallacy happens when the authority is not an expert in the relevant field. So, an appeal to authority fallacy would be like if you're listening to your favorite astrophysicist tell you their hot political take, right? Saying, well, this astrophysicist said this about this politician. Well, that astrophysicist expertise does not lie in the realm of politics. So that would be an example of an appeal to authority fallacy. The second point, the authority's opinion is not supported by the evidence. Any expert in any field ought to be able, if you asked him or her, well, what reason do you have to believe that? What's your justification for that? Ought to be able to provide you with evidence to support their claim. Now, what this evidence looks like is going to be very different depending upon which discipline we're talking about. Is this a history expert in the Civil War? Is this a cosmologist who's looking at star formation? Is this a doctor who specializes in breast cancer or some other form of cancer? If you ask that doctor, well, what are the leading causes of breast cancer? And they give you an answer, and then you say, well, how do you know that? They ought to be able to provide you some evidence to support that claim. But their evidence is going to look a little different from, let's say, the historian who's talking about the Civil War. But regardless of their area of expertise, they should have ample amount of evidence to support their opinion. And the third point here is when we assume that the authority figure is infallible. Everybody can be wrong, even experts. Even the area I'm an ex, and this is one of the telling hallmarks that you can watch. Like, so watch an expert really talk about what they specialize in on an academic level. And oftentimes they're going to be very cautious in how they approach things, especially if they're in a room of other experts because of who's listening, of how they phrase things, because they're aware of the fact that even in what they specialize in, they could be wrong. You see this, I experience this all the time when I go to philosophy concerts, when I go to philosophy conferences. A philosophy concert would be kind of cool. Or for example, when I'm speaking to my advisor, when I make points, I have to be very careful with what I say, because if I overstep that point in any way, or if I go beyond the evidence for that point, I'm going to have to account for that. So those are the three things to look out for with the appeal to authority fallacy. But what makes this confusing is that there is a legitimate way to appeal to authority. And when we're constructing an argument or analyzing information, we actually do want to appeal to authority. So let's get to the second part of this video and my further point, which is when is it proper to appeal to authority?
Now, I want to make something clear. If somebody said, biology expert said that mitochondria does the following, I will assume it's not stupid because it's a fact.
Okay, so here we have a basis of expertise. So going back to what Dennis said here, if a biology expert said something about the mitochondria, that the mitochondria does the following, he will assume it's a fact. So now we have some grounds of authority and what good authority or what a proper appeal to authority would look like. So let's talk about what a valid appeal to expertise, what a valid appeal to authority looks like. So, first and foremost, it's valid when the expert is talking about something that is within their area of expertise. When we've confirmed that they have legitimate credentials in the form of education, in the form of years of experience or training, and or career experience in that specific field related to the claim. A perfect example of this would be citing a climate scientist when we're talking about climate change, or if a climate scientist says something about climate change, it would be proper in that situation to assume that they are correct. They are speaking to their field. But it's a little bit more complicated because the second point here, we want to check the consensus of the field. Is what this expert is saying in general agreement with what other experts in the field are saying? Typically speaking, if you're looking like at an academic journal or an academic book, it has been peer reviewed, which means that other experts has reviewed this piece of writing, and whether or not they agree with the particular outcome, have certified that the argument that has been presented, the claim that has been presented, has a sufficient amount of evidence to back it up. So if it is possible, we want to confirm that the expert's opinion that we're listening to aligns with the broader consensus of the field. An isolated or a fringe expert may not be reliable or credible. They may have been pushed out of the community for a reason. That's not to say that all experts are going to agree with each other on everything. So, for example, in my field, there are very few Bachelard scholars who agree with me. Nevertheless, they will accept, I assume, because some of my papers have been published, they will assume that the arguments that I'm making about Bachelard are legitimate, even if they might disagree. So consensus is not just mindlessly accepting whatever every expert says, but looking at whether or not the people that are in that area generally agree upon the point. A popular example of this would be referring to what the medical community generally regards as the effectiveness of vaccines over and against that one doctor on YouTube who's telling you that vaccines cause autism or something along those lines. That person might have a medical background, but there's a reason why everybody else in the field is disagreeing with them on that point. And finally, we want to demand evidence to ensure that the expert's claim is actually backed up by the data, the research, or the studies. And this is good practice in your everyday life, especially if you have like a medical appointment and your doctor tells you one thing and suggests a certain treatment. You want to ask, okay, well, has this been done before? What were the results? Has there been trials performed on this sort of particular medication? I'm having these side effects. Has anybody else experienced this? We want as much data as possible when an expert tells us something, if only for our own sake, but also to kind of verify and to make valid the information that they're relaying to us. Okay, so let's continue on with the video. And I want to say in the last part of this video, there's going to be a very strange conversation and a very unfortunate conversation related to suicide. So just as a content warning there, but it's important to point out because of the nature of the claims that Dennis is going to make about mental health issues.
What does it mean to be an expert on suicide? Seriously, it's an interesting question. What does that mean? Clearly, it's not an expert on how people commit suicide. That's a fact, and that I wouldn't debate. Do they hang themselves? Do they take pills? Do they shoot themselves? I would accept an expert's statistical statement about that. But why people commit suicide, that's not a matter of expertise. That is a matter of wisdom. Wisdom and expertise have nothing to do with one another. Nothing.
So Dennis uses the example of suicide to illustrate the point that when experts assume certain things or make assumptions about certain events, activities, issues, that we have to recognize when they're making an assumption and when they're speaking outside of their area of expertise. And he uses a very strange example here. And I'm not quite sure why he chose to focus on suicide, but it's an awful example. And his conclusions that he's positing as a result are also awful. So I felt like I had to address this at some level. So he says, what does it mean to be an expert on suicide? Why people commit suicide is not a matter of expertise, it's a matter of wisdom. So, this is a very disturbing statement, especially for people who might be struggling with mental health issues. And it's also just really confusing. Um, has Dennis never heard of psychology or psychiatry or sociology or public health? Like, all of these academic areas study mental health issues. A tremendous amount of research has been put in by psychologists and psychiatrists exploring the reasons why people commit suicide. It almost has almost nothing to do with the methods that they use. Like, what that even tell, like, I'm not even sure why you would bring that up as an example just because you're able to statistically analyze it. I suppose mental health is a legitimate area of broader health, but there are experts in these fields that have researched this issue of suicide for decades. I mean, modern psychology, we can say, begins in the early 20th century, maybe a little early. I mean, I guess it starts earlier in the United States with people like William James. I'm sidetracking myself here, but suicide has always been a topic of modern psychology. And there's decades of research, data, clinical experience to understand the various risk factors associated with suicides, the warning signs, and prevention strategies. There are entire clinics that specialize this in the United States. There's mental health facilities that have treatment protocols for people that are on suicide watch. Like, this isn't some mystery. And we have hard data that we can point to about what's effective strategies, prevention strategies, and for why somebody might be in this mindset in the first place. I mean, you can look into the DSM for, the depression, suicidal ideology, the causes for such things, the signs of such things. It's been well researched and documented. And expertise, especially expertise in mental health, is a key strategy for untangling the complexities of suicide and understanding how it works. And to act like that doesn't exist, especially with such a large YouTube channel, not knowing who might be watching your videos and who might be hearing these things, is at best, it is completely and utterly unresponsible. And at worst, this is potentially dangerous for somebody who might be struggling with these issues who watches this video. This false dichotomy that's presented between suicide and wisdom. I mean, what is that even about? Are you saying that people that commit suicide aren't wise, or if they just had enough wisdom? Like, why would you even say such a thing? It's just very odd. Who are struggling with these mental health issues don't need wisdom, they need professional health by experts. Okay, I'm going to end this video on that awful note. Let me know what you think of this notion of expertise in the comment section, and I'll see all of you next time.